All right, so we've got here our first episode of our coaches chat series, and first up is Steve Anderson, and we're going to be working through a process where we get to discuss rugby during this period, and just want to create an open forum where we get to discuss all things around coaching, rugby, and themes that are going on in our community and also communities around the world. So, Steve Anderson, you're the first one off the cab here, and you're going to be leading us through a lot of different themes in the coming months. So I'm just going to share our screen. We'll go into a bit of a background of your story.
Thanks,
so
Dylan.
First, all right. So first up here, we've got a bit of a backdrop of some photos and some legends of the game, which is exciting to see as well. Do you just want to give a bit of a background on what some of these images mean to you?
Yeah, thanks, Dylan. Look, probably most would probably know that I had a quite an extensive rugby league career in coaching before I stepped into rugby, and those images all hold some significance to not only my career but development. So if we go back, not so much where it started in league, but my journey went through several different stages while still playing, as it was then, semi-professional league. I started coaching seniors at 25 years of age, which was quite a daunting task. Playing grade football and coaching lower grade was quite a heavy commitment in those days, 7 days a week. But certainly that was back in South's Magpies in Brisbane, way back in, we won't go into years, it's too far back. But let me say that it was in the 80s. So look, very fortunate to have a mentor of sorts in a guy called Jeff Naylor, who offered me the opportunity, and it was quite a huge task, but certainly it was a task that probably had a whole host of different challenges, which most coaches know about, and a lot of this series will be presenting topics of this nature. But one of the main issues was transitioning from well, not so much transitioning, but your first step into coaching, and what are those challenges. So obviously being a player coach in that era, which wasn't uncommon. But certainly the same issues that confront coaches today were present then, and I'm testimony to that. With 27, 28 years of professional coaching under my belt now, so I can look back, I can contrast, and I can say with authority that there's a lot of issues around coaching and development in terms of how you mature, who actually mentors, and who guides you through your early career as a coach. It's incredibly important. I mean, if I look at today's support for coaches, we have a lot of available material, but also mentoring programs that support coaches through their journey. But if I fast track through to one of those images on the slide, St. Helens versus Melbourne. Obviously, I was a professional coach at Melbourne Storm, and we played St. Helens in the World Club Challenge Final, as it was called. Quite a significant period for me, because it was sort of an era where we'd just come out of the Super League war, which, if you're as old as I am, you'll know exactly what that means. There was a lot of challenges presented there off the field. Basically, it was a fight between, the media magnates, Murdoch and Packer. But certainly it was a testing time, both on the field and off the field. So that image there, we won the World Club Challenge. The previous year, we'd to get to that position, we had to win the NRL Grand Final, where we beat St George in 1999. So that photo image is from 2000. We played St Helens. I think it was at Wigan's home ground. Can't remember. So quite a successful period. During that period, I was also the assistant coach with the Australian Kangaroos. I did that for 3 years. And in 2000, we won the World Cup at Old Trafford, beating New Zealand. So it was quite a successful period for me, but it all started, way back, some, 15 or so years previous to that. Long journey to get to there. But certainly I was supported, I suppose, through that initial period in rugby league with some great mentors. The other images on there is, I stepped out of rugby league after coaching Warrington in the Super League in the UK. I stepped out of league at the end of 2002. I went to Glasgow or Scottish Rugby, and part of my role at Scottish Rugby in high performance was I was assigned to Glasgow Warriors as their assistant coach. And that bottom image there is a game at their old ground. They have a new stadium now at Scottstown. But certainly that period of initiation or transitioning from league to union at a pro level was again quite challenging. But once again, I was blessed. I had some fantastic mentors in Jim Telfer and Ian McGeechan. But certainly at Glasgow Warriors, we did quite well. We got through the semi-finals of what they now call the Pro 14. It was called the Celtic or Magners League back then. So we had a bit of success. And at the same time, I was performance director with the Scottish Rugby Union. So I was based at Murrayfield, and I was over all our high performance and academy, and I also did national duties with the national team. I was a defence coach for a few years, and including, I went out to the World Cup in 2003 as well on staff. So that photo there of Scotland in the centre, again quite significant, and holds fond memories. I went through several Six Nations series, autumn tests. Played against some brilliant teams of that era. South Africa, the All Blacks. Six Nations is a competition to die for as a pro coach. Fantastic history, and certainly challenged every aspect of your coaching at that level.
So just to jump in there, was the appeal, did you have a knowledge of the Six Nations and then rugby being a world game, and that was a bit of a draw card to move over from league, or how did that transition happen?
Yeah, Dylan, look, I was approached several times. In Australia, I had a close relationship with Heine Meyer, at that stage, current Pretoria Bulls head coach, and also South African Springbok coach or assistant coach under Nick Mallett. And along the way, I'd done some work with Brendan Benter at London Irish, and also Gary Gold. So I'd already been approached several times, as were several of my counterparts in pro league to go across to rugby. Did I have already an interest? Yeah, of course. In Australia, as you know, we play league and union. Coming through our junior ranks, we're exposed to both. But certainly at that stage, I had other interests at a personal level, and not just a professional level, but a personal level to go across to rugby. And as I said, Ian McGeechan and Jim Telfer were the guys that got me across to rugby in the end. But I'd already dabbled. I'd done consultancy work with Pretoria Bulls in particular under Brendan Benter, and I'd also done some consultancy work with London Irish under Brenda Vedder, and Pretoria Bulls with Heine May. So, it held an interest, obviously, but as a professional coach too, I was looking for other challenges outside of rugby league. But it was a tough initiation in going into Scotland. 4 years, they were in a lot of trouble, like off the field. Their finances weren't well, and there's a whole host of issues, but fantastic challenge.
I guess you got the opportunity in that experience across not only hands-on coaching with the national team, but then trying to work within their high performance and trying to make change in that area as well.
Yeah, do look at it. The high performance area was always, coaching was never the end for me. I always thought there was another level, another layer, and it wasn't so much as a chief executive or a rugby operations manager. And I was one of the new, luckily, I was one of the new guys put into created positions like high performance manager and director of high performance. And it wasn't just, when people talk about high performance, most of them think immediately it's about athletic development, but it's not. I was over several areas, pretty similar to what I'm doing now as director of rugby in WA. So I was over the academies, I was over the coach education, and then you had all your national underage programs that spun off from your academies, the talent ID side of it. So piecing together and strategically planning and mapping out, on a 4-year World Cup cycle was always incredibly important to me. It was about the vision of your programs, not just about the match at international level or provincial level. There's always another, 3 to 4 years of planning to do, particularly at national level. As I mentioned, it's always around a World Cup cycle. So, combining both coaching, which was my existing skill set, and also the high performance area, which is the strategic side of the game, was incredibly rewarding. And it fitted my professional background as well.
Oh. Well, it was obviously it's great to get a background of your experiences there, and I think over the length of this series we'll be able to definitely go in deeper and touch on more of the experience that you've had across both codes. So we're looking forward to that.
Yeah, thanks, Phil.
So what we'll do, like we said, we're going to give a little bit of an overview of the next 5 themes that are going to be in our coaches series, just to give us a bit of a background and where we're heading. So we go into, it's the five themes that we have in front of us here. This will just give us a little bit of a snapshot of where we're heading, and how we're going to have presenters come in and talk about the different topics, but obviously use it as a collaborative platform where we get to use all our experiences over time, and then build it into an open forum where our community and anyone else watching around the world gets to join in and start just discussing rugby and talking those themes and points into more detail as a group.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. I think if you look at, for our viewers, there's 5 key areas that we've mapped out, plus a host of other generic areas that we'll discuss over the coming weeks. But if you look at, so Dill, they can see this, obviously?
Yeah, they can see this, yep.
So if you look at the 5 key elements or 5 key programs that we've isolated, from a game plan right through to communication, I mean, every one of those areas have some sort of significance with no matter what age bracket you're coaching. And what we'll be talking about through this series is its application and use, but also its relevance. Where does it fit? How does it fit into a particular age demographic? And also the important one for me is, where does the relevance lie in terms of significance for the player and the coach? So how did that coach-player relationship, and how does it fit inside those 5 programs that we've isolated. And as you know, like each of those areas all have incredibly important aspects in terms of the athlete and the coach. So if we look at some of the areas around building a game plan, you know, if I just draw on you know, a national level, and where does that fit and how does that fit? I mean, the game plans change dependent on your environment. It is dependent on how much you know about your opponent. It is dependent on, you know, all areas, including, you know, the length and time that you've had your players together. So they all hold significance, but there's context to every one of those elements that need to be factored in when you bring about, you know, when you start talking about things like seasons in review and communication.
Yep.
Do you want to add to that, Bill? Or?
Yeah, I was just going to say that's where, just to give everyone watching a bit of context of the different, I guess, target audiences that we're talking about. So in the junior space, we're talking about the 6 to 12-year-old. In the youth space, we're talking about the 13 to 18-year-old, and then we're looking in the seniors and that. And like Ando just touched on there, where, you know, all of us can be relevant across those different audiences, and that's where our open forums after each theme is a good platform for each of those coaches or even players in those different categories to discuss what's relevant to them and how it could fit to them. And that's where we can actually discuss as a community how we can help each other out in that scenario.
Just building on what you just said then to Dill. I'll just go through each category briefly, but I mean, a game plan, you know, what is a game plan? For me, it's about providing, you know, the essence of how we go about piecing together a particular strategy or even an outcome for a particular game. So if I looked at, I've got 3 different significant parts to building a game plan. It goes right back, and I mentioned context before. So generically, if I applied this model to, you know, I don't talk game plans that Dylan mentioned 6 to 12-year-old. I mean, we're all about skill acquisition and fun and learning the game at that stage. So game plans don't play a part. So one of the discussion points will be around, you know, where do we introduce a game plan? But certainly if I looked at those 3 wheels or those 3 depictions, each one of those has significance in terms of how do we get to a particular match plan. So it starts from, you know, particularly at senior level, how we piece together your squad. Then you're moving into your macro cycles, and then you move into your micro cycles of planning, right down to the actual selection of your team each week. So they all play significant parts to actually how you put your plan together. But as I mentioned, in a senior context, you know, you talk about squad philosophy, staffing models. I mean, they're all incredibly important, and they all impact on how we actually put the season plan together, and then how do we actually get a match plan. So each caters for each cycle, each underpins each cycle. So if you look at those terms and some of those reference points I've got there around, you know, things like delivery, coaching delivery, incredibly important if we want to get the significance of a match plan to be converted. So you go from application to, concept to application in terms of delivering a plan inside a match. If we're not talking the same, if we're not delivering and coaching the same in terms of how we approach the team, you're going to have confusion. So obviously that impacts on the outcome of your match plan.
Yeah.
So we'll be going into a greater sense of detail around those areas, but certainly, you know, they're applicable to pretty much all age brackets except that early period of growth where we're talking 6 to 12.
Yeah. I think, yeah, even we'll go into more detail, but from a community point of view, we're talking about seniors and consistent delivery methods and staffing models, where you get that through your grade system and your first and second, your third grading, wanting players to be an easy transition if they do move through the grades, and that's where the coaching alignment comes into it, I guess. Hey?
Yeah, your coaching alignment is a whole new ball game. One of the areas that we have spoken, Dylan, about, as you know, a lot of our program is about trying to get alignment between our academy and our clubs, as an example. What we do, they need to know about with the player, because they're the player is their product, basically. And we just have them for a 5-6 month period at the start of each year, where we can provide best support for that individual to realise talent, but certainly alignment between coaches within a club, within the various levels of the club, incredibly important again. And that's why we always talk about alignment, but also having the person to enable that. So a coaching coordinator or a coaching director. I do see a lot in RugbyWA clubs where there's a disconnect between first, seconds, thirds into their cults. Are they aware of it? Yeah, I think they are. But there's still some melody out there where thirds want to just play thirds, and that's fine. But I still think there should be a philosophical alignment between what the head coach of the club, what he's trying to get across to the program, meaning the club as a whole, and all its layers. There should be synergy, and it should be driven back through the club. And that's not disqualifying the coach of each of those grades, their own innovation. What I'm talking about here is a generic level of communication, a generic level of teaching, right down to what are the common set plays that we're using. And I'm sure a lot of clubs do it, but there's still a lot that don't.
Yeah. As we spoke about, we knew this first presentation was going to be a bit of a struggle from not going into too much detail, but we could go into a lot, I think, into each of these individual things. But we'll push on to the next one, which is another big one that we feel is a massive, important area that we want to bring back into the community, and we have been for a while. But I think this is across the globe as well, so another good topic to go into.
Yeah, look, what I will say with this is it's one of my pet aversions. It's an area I've seen the cycles of change in our game, where we've moved away from those experienced fitness specialists to more theory-based, outcome-driven programs. I think we need to find a happy marriage between the theory and the prac, for many reasons, but one of them is about what I've got right in the centre of that slide is game fit. I think it's again important that we understand that it's another term that we use is functional fitness. We're playing a collision sport, and there's nothing more demanding than playing rugby on the body. So certainly welfare and well-being are a big part of what we do in our programming and conditioning, but certainly the specificity of our game, and it warrants specificity and functional fitness elements. So at the moment, there's a bit of a tide change. If I go back to the 90s and 2000s, it was very game functional fitness. And it's sort of changed over the past 15 plus years to being very KPI outcome driven around theoretical concepts, driven from graduates in sports science, and there's nothing wrong with that, I might add, but we need to be looking at what does the game demand, what are the challenges fitness wise, and then base our programs around exactly that. It's got to be about the game. A lot of coaches I come in contact with, when I mention functional fitness, we're doing defence, it's live. There's no in between. It has to be done live. Now, we obviously can't train our athlete in opposed scenarios for 2 hours every night. It won't work. Whether you're in attack or defence, there's opposed scenarios. But so what I do, this is where your pre-season is so incredibly important. So that's your foundation to getting your body ready for collision. Once in season, obviously your body is taking collision every week through the match. So you don't need to be training for 2 hours each session on body specifics that's relevant to rugby. That's not what it's about.
Yeah.
It's about turning the body on. So you might do on a Tuesday night or a Wednesday, whatever you're training, your early training nights, you might only do 10 to 12 minutes to turn the body back on again, to get the machinations and the mechanics right, particularly timing in those collision aspects of the game that are so incredibly important under pressure. If you don't do it through the week, you will end up being a rusty bike. You will lose the timing, which leads to error. So we just need to be cognizant of the fact that we just need to turn the body on and have those small-sided games that include collision. You don't have to do 20 large components of your session in full-on collision, but certainly need to turn the body on.
Yeah,
incredibly important.
Yeah, I think even with that, you're saying that's where you see the timing or the errors, but you also probably then see the injuries as well, because the body's not adapted and it can't adapt, and all of a sudden now it's copped a knock that it's not used to again, and all of a sudden now you're dealing with an injured player.
Without a doubt, I think a lot of injuries, particularly at our level, at the amateur level of the game, is born purely out of the fact that they're not game fit, and we don't. You can't turn up to a collision games 2 weeks out from your first game of the year and expect not to incur an injury somewhere along the line. And clubs are doing this.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to talk about negligence, but certainly I've mentioned it in dispatches. If we're not conditioning the player appropriately, you are negligent as a coach. We are playing collision sport. It's that simple.
Yep.
So by default, you have to have some sort of contact inside your sessions. Yep. Stands to reason.
Look forward to getting into more detail on that one, but yeah, definitely a big one. I think we'll hear a lot more around is that game fit or fit for purpose across the board when we start talking more about these different themes. So this will lead into the next one around our analysis and developing our systems.
Yeah, look, it's one, you've got to have a system first before you can analyse. Two, if I break it down into specifics of the game, it's very easy. Like in terms of run, pass, tackle, we can all measure that, and we can take stats on it. I've never been a big fan of statistics. More around conversions, which we'll talk about inside the webinar sessions in more detail. But certainly, if you look at that little roadmap on developing a system and analysis, I mean, there's a whole host of things in there, from match and training, that need to be analysed. And I've mentioned even philosophy in there, because your philosophy predicates all areas of your program. It precedes everything, including analysis, the way you perceive a game and the way you measure a game. So if you don't have a philosophy, you're catching and grabbing. And once you break philosophy down, it then becomes into styles. What style of attack and defence are you playing? And then how do we look at that? How do we measure the effectiveness of our attack and defence? And I made the distinction there between statistic and conversion. Statistic is a raw stat, which means very little in a moving game, such as rugby. There's a whole host of variables that sit around the application of a skill in a particular moment. So there's some of the discussion points we'll get to. But certainly conversions is the other area. You know, time spent in the opposition's 22 with ball in hand, how many times do we produce points? And I'm not talking penalty goals. So we're actually getting across, you know, the white line, putting points on the board, tries, converting, you know, against converting ball in hand against your match plan or your game plan. You know, you have key outcomes for particular areas of your field, and we occupy that territory. How many times in attack and how many times do we handle the ball to gain a particular outcome? So they're ways you can measure your performance. The underlying theme with all this is context. It's one of my words that I use quite regularly in rugby. You've got to have context to everything you're doing, including your analysis. Conversions for me provide context because it's more about the game as it unfolds. It's more about the efforts inside a particular attack defense spectrum, as an example, and it caters for the occurrences that may influence an applied skill. So that's what we need to be measuring. You know, if you talk outcomes, it's the process of it's the measurement of process that I'm more interested in than as distinct from the actual outcome.
I think that one is definitely a hot topic from the community, especially with the coaches that we're talking about. You know, are a bit time poor, so finding an effective way to look at their games and getting you know, that the stats and the conversions that actually matter is definitely something that's going to help the coaches in the community with their analysis work.
Jill, as you know, in this day and age, there are a lot of software applications out there that make all you need to do is be able to video the game and, you know, basically get people to convert that video to, you know, to data that you can use.
Yep.
The other part is using data, the use of data. Do we open the data up to the player, or is there some data that you hold personally to account for your own reference point? So there's a lot of material that I used to hold away from the player because it wasn't relevant to him. So that's another area that we need to chat about. But certainly, you know, it can be as complicated or as simple a system as you need. You don't have to go overboard with this, but the players need to understand that it's about them. Yep. It's not the coach and his little match plan. It's got to be about them. It's got to mean something to them.
Yeah. And again, you hear those stories about the player, and as soon as the game's finished, running over to the analysis and asking how many tackles did he get or how many tackles did he miss. So we don't want these players to be driven by the data, which is another risk that we have in this system today.
Yes, don't start me on that one.
We'll get on to the next slide then. Okay. So I guess, it leads into now around how we look to review our season plan and how that helps us lead into, you know, into the next season coming up.
Yeah, if you go to the base of that diagram, you've got rugby, sports science, and operations. You know, they're probably the three critical elements that I look at. Obviously, rugby is a big one in terms of your planning. Sports science, you're then talking about, once you go into sports science and operations, it's what are those supporting structures that we need to be in place, but also what we need to improve on as the season progresses, or even at the end of season. So it's the supporting structures that need to be looked at continually. You need to keep them fluid, and they need to be driven about the player's performance. So, you know, sports science is a big area, including, I mentioned the word welfare before, and well-being. So, you know, at a pro level is always, you know, a psychologist they can refer to. It's no different at an amateur level. We should be into this space. There's plenty of, you know, organisations out there that can actually talk to players about the psychology of how they're going about the game, about their own welfare, and about their welfare. So these are all part of your planning. So, you know, your micro, macro, really simplistically put. I mentioned a little bit around the game plan. That's probably more in terms of planning. That's more the micro layer, whereas your macro is more about your season planning. You know, if I had 26 rounds of rugby, you know, I'd particularly break it down into a pre-season, in-season, and a maintenance part of the program at the end of the year. So once you then isolate your in-season, as an example, you then are going into, you know, what are the key milestones that we need to achieve across your season, once we're in season, in this case. And then how do you break up your team's goal setting, as an example? How does that work? Do we do it in 4-week blocks? Do we talk about where we want to be at the end of the first complete round of rugby? You know, 13 matches into it, where do we want to be? Obviously, you factor in the maturity of the group, where you come from last year, where you finished, if you're there for your second year or third year. All of those are considerations in your planning. But certainly, each layer also has a micro and a macro level. And I mentioned the key one up there, sits loud and proud. It's about the player. Yep. Nothing you do with your inside out programming isn't about the player. It has to be all about, for me anyway, the performance of the player, and how do we best get the most potential and the best performance out of that individual and the group.
Yeah.
So every aspect should be looked at in terms of, you know, what does your plan do for your player?
Yeah, no, 100% agree with that. I guess, yeah, if we put the player in the center of everything, then, you know, that starts directing our different planning and where we're going to head with that area, just to make sure the player gets the best outcome. And from there, that adds into performance. Yeah. All right, so that leads into just our last theme for the start of the series, and that's a big one. And obviously it's a big one that we push within our system in the academy system, but you just want to touch on more around the communication and the delivery and methods.
Yeah, look, it's our whole program as a coach revolves around your ability to efficiently or inefficiently communicate. If you're not looking at the communication as an area to improve, you'll fail. Now, communication just doesn't mean the way we speak. So if you look at those areas there, consistency. So, you know, if I'm not consistent with my communication and speak and language and terminology, you'll have confusion. Obviously, that's poor communication. If I look at collaborative, where you start and finish with your comms inside a program, and this is in any model of operation, whether it's business, commercial, or rugby, if you're not collaborative with the way you approach your program, you'll fail. You cannot impose and superimpose your own thinking over a group. It has to be collaborative. And one of the discussion points around that area is, you know, where do you start not being the dominating feature in your coaching program as a coach? Where does the collaboration, engagement, integration actually start, where you're handing over to a player? So that's a big area. Yeah. The engage component, a little bit like collaboration. Engage meaning once you collaborate, there's a process called evaluation and assessment. So you need to engage your players in that process. You need to understand that your communication, and Dill, you've heard me say this many times, our measure is our stakeholder. So in this case, our players are our measure. So you need to engage them to get an understanding of, one, how effective was I with my comms? How effective was the coaching staff with their comms? What can we do to improve to make sure that the communication is more efficient and we understand collectively? Massive area. And the other one is, you know, the specifics of your comms. You know, a lot of your specifics, we're all thinking probably comes from the terminology you use in your set play and all that sort of stuff, but it's broader than that. It's much, much, much broader. The player needs to feel at all times, as an example, that they have the ability to walk to your office or to you directly and speak openly and transparently about any area. If you do not have clarity in this respect at the outset of your program in regard to communication, you will fail the player, because you'll have an aspect of your group that isn't buying in. If they're not confident about fronting you, you do not have engaged, you do not have collaborative, and you certainly won't get consistency in your communications, but ultimately your performance. So communication is so important, just sits at the center of everything.
Yeah.
The whole spectrum of coaching balances on how well you communicate.
Yeah, and I think it's a really important topic in our current climate with a generation of athlete or kids that are coming through right now. Communication isn't something that they actually are doing actively all the time, because a lot of it's now on screens or just talking through phone, or they haven't have a built up of communication skills over time to really, once they get out into being an adult and talking for themselves, they haven't built up those skills yet.
No, and again, Dylan, you've been exposed to the way we work in terms of the leadership program. A lot of that's about instilling confidence in the player, but also presenting scenarios where the player has to communicate with his peers and with us as coaches.
Yep.
So the more you do it, the more you break down those hurdles and those bridges that occupy the current player's understanding of communication, and the better they become at it. So the more we attend to it and the more we address it, the better the individual becomes at communicating. And I think the other important point about the comms, and it's built in around engagement and collaboration and being specific, is encouraging the player to actually talk to you and not be frightened of coming and having a chat to you.
Yep.
So giving that confidence to communicate is incredibly important as well.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. To see that day in, day out with this academy group, but you can also see the benefits and just the improvements of when they are actively working on it each week through the leadership program. So I think it's a really positive theme and topic that the community coaches will take a lot of value from.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so that's our first one done. A little bit of a snapshot of where we're heading. But yeah, so like I said at the start, we'll be working on a theme each week, and then following the theme, we'll actually be able to have an open forum through Zoom. So we'll be able to put up the registration and the link that goes up to that, and that's an opportunity to discuss the points that we spoke about in the presentation, and with the presenter, whoever it might be for each theme, but also an opportunity to send any questions in the lead up to it, and we can discuss them and talk about them as an open group, and really have, like Andrew said, in communication, a collaborative view on how we're trying to engage the rest of the community.
Thanks, Dill.
No worries. We'll see you next week.
Good on you.